You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Welcome in, everybody, to yet another live simulcast here of the Huddle Up Podcast. Chad Jensen, Zack Kelberman coming to you live here on both YouTube and Facebook. We love doing these Huddle Up Podcast live sessions. How you doing, brother?
I'm good. Kind of still reeling from that Broncos loss, as I'm sure you are as well, and kind of sifting through Broncos Country's reactions. And it's not much positive to be found, Chad. It's kind of a depressing atmosphere right now in Bronco land.
Yeah, it's one of those, where does the team go from here type of situations. It was just, I think a lot of fans could have accepted a loss in the face of the Chiefs game, but a debacle on the scale that was, players giving up in the third quarter, including your quarterback. It just leaves the fans with not just a sour taste in their mouth, but literally at a loss. They don't know what they're seeing right now. It's so atypical of this franchise. Let's welcome in everybody that's joining us so far, and more people, of course, will sift into the room. But all of our viewers and listeners on both YouTube and Facebook, Blue Cybert, Brian Simmons, Dallin Joseph, Ryan, CA Sports, Stewart, what's up, you guys? Today we're gonna talk a lot about some of these trade rumors that are swirling around your Denver Broncos, and especially as they pertain to Emmanuel Sanders. And we are going to get to that here in just a second. Just really quick, one reminder, you guys, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at Huddle Up Pod. That's the best way for you guys to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the Huddle Up Podcast in real time. Stay plugged in, stay on top of things. And then if you guys like what you hear with the Huddle Up Podcast, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a creative review and a 5-star rating. It's a great, easy, organic way to help the show. And then don't forget to get out on mybookie.ag, use promo code overtime, make some wagers on the NFL games if you fancy that type of thing, and get your first deposit matched 100% by using code overtime.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Man, last week's loss on Thursday night was tough, but the Denver Broncos are going to get the chance to redeem themselves this week, going on the road to Lucas Oil Stadium to take on the Indianapolis Colts. Make sure you have your seat in that game ready to go with Vivid Seats. Vivid Seats is the top source for tickets for the events you want to go to. You can sort by price, or you can look for seats in the section and row of your choice, all in the Vivid Seats app. To make things even better, you guys, Vivid Seats now has a loyalty program that allows fans to earn credit back, the Vivid Seats Rewards. Go to the App Store or Google Play and download the Vivid Seats app. Fans are automatically enrolled in the Vivid Seats Rewards loyalty program. Every purchase is backed by a 100% buyer guarantee. From the biggest concerts and games to the hottest theater shows and more, Vivid Seats has it all. It's not just Denver Broncos seats. Download the app and join the Vivid Seats Rewards loyalty program today. And you guys, when it's time to buy, new users, you have to enter the promo code OVERTIME at checkout to receive a discount of up to $100, and it also lets you know that we sent you at the Huddle Up Podcast. All right, Zack, we're going to get to what everyone has on their minds here, questions, concerns. Steven coming in hot already on Super Chat, $30 donation. Steven, you are the man.
Steven.
Appreciate you. Let's talk first, though, about the report from Adam Schefter that came out over the weekend, and that is that the Denver Broncos are open to, quote, listening to trade offers for embittered and embattled veteran wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders. Now, thing is, because he's got as much time in the league as he has, the Broncos – I used to think that the Broncos were going to be getting a third-round compensatory pick, 2021 third-round pick, once they let him go in free agency in March. However, it was brought to my attention today by Eric Trickle that because of the amount of time he's got in the league, Zach, the best that they can get on the comp market from the NFL is a fifth-round pick. So if the phone rings and you're John Elway and the offer is a third or a fourth-round pick today for the 2020 draft, that's got to be a trade that you make.
If you can get a third-round pick for Emmanuel Sanders, 32 years old, coming off a torn Achilles, you would take that and run. There'd be no second-guessing about that. I don't know, though, that they're going to get a day 2 pick. I know they're supposedly holding out for that, but I would think based on his lack of production and kind of him being in no man's land this season, I would say maybe a 4th would be the most optimistic, realistic scenario for the Broncos and Sanders. But it's looking like a foregone conclusion. If they can get any sort of mid-round compensation, maybe a player and a 5th-round pick in return, I think they're going to do it. Among the Broncos' fire sale candidates, Sanders seems like the most likely to go. It seems like it's only a matter of time, matter of when, not if.
Well, not only does he appear to be disgruntled, but he's making public overtures, throwing his offensive coordinator under the bus. Now, I don't think that you and I were able to talk about it immediately following Thursday night's game on the Gut Reaction episode, because I don't think it was brought to my attention anyway till long after that. But in the locker room following that debacle of a loss, Emmanuel Sanders did throw Rich Scangarello under the bus. And sometimes you see NFL players do such a thing to a coordinator. It's rare. And when it happens, NFL teams, suffice to say, they take notice. And basically what he says is that the Broncos offense, we need to execute, we need to step up, took the players' share of the blame, but then also said we need to call better plays. And without going into detail that's probably not right for us ethical to share at this point, there is a gap, let's just say, between Rich Scangarello and Emmanuel Sanders at this stage. And I think the team is recognizing, obviously, he's not in the future plans. He's 32 years old. He's in a contract year. Zach, they need to make some hay while the sun is shining. If the phone rings and even if it's a 5th-round pick, I mean, that's more valuable because it's 2020 than waiting an extra year and going to the comp picks for the Broncos.
Right. Plus, you can clear some sort of cap space. The other team would be on the hook for whatever proration of his contract and his salary this year. Like I said, if you can do it, you got to do it. He's a guy. He didn't just run or back up the bus over Scangarello. He put it in reverse and put it in park again. Those were very pointed comments, and I think he was expressing the frustration and speaking on behalf of Broncos country. But he's also a guy who knows the writings on the wall. He sees where he's headed. He was probably fortunate to be back this season alone at his current salary. So to last this long coming off that injury, I think he knows that Cortland Sutton took him over. They have Deshaun Hamilton. They have Tim Patrick, who might come off the injured list. He knows that he has no real future role with this team, and he put that post up on Instagram. It was a clock. He knows. It's all just a matter of when.
Stuart, thanks, my friend. We really appreciate that.
You, Stuart. Thank you.
Again, we are keeping track of all our great listeners who are donating, contributing on the Super Chat on YouTube, and we're going to have something special planned for you guys here in the very near future. So appreciate you, Stuart. Let's talk about other candidates here. We got some questions here. Who are the top likely candidates the Broncos will listen to trade offers for? And first, let's get this one out of the way. Von Miller, okay? Yep. He's not – here's how I see this. Tell me if you disagree, Zach. He is one of those players that does factor into the team's plans beyond 2019, and he's a future Ring of Fame, future Hall of Fame caliber player, completely 100% homegrown in Denver. Yeah, it's been some lean years. Yeah, it's been some dark years. However, unless he were to throw his weight around, make some kind of a power play on that Broncos front office and try and force his way out of Denver, which I don't see as being – that would be atypical of the player we've come to know over the last 9 seasons. I don't see that as even something really occurring to John Elway and company at this time to trade Von Miller.
No, if it's going to happen like we've been talking about, I think it'll happen in the offseason between the salary cap hits and the dead money being left over on his contract. I mean, this is one scenario where unless he literally marched into his office and went Trent Williams on John Elway saying, I'm not playing another down for you ever again, then they might see if they can get sort of a compensation package. If Elway wants a Khalil Mack sort of package, though, it's just not going to happen for Miller coming off the down season. Ultimately, he's not going anywhere, and as much as Broncos fans are growing dismayed by Miller's lack of production, it's just one guy who's the team is stuck with, I think, financially for the rest of the season and probably next year too. Yeah, Jacob, I think that's a sentiment many in Broncos country share right now, being relieved that I thought I'd be relieved the Broncos didn't play today. Yep, still am. That's how bad that Thursday night loss was. But so Von Miller, Zach, we scratch him off the list. We move on. We've already touched on Emmanuel Sanders. It wouldn't surprise me. I know the trade deadline's not till the 29th, so 9 days from right now. But it wouldn't surprise me, Zach, if he's moved this week.
like in the next day or two, because the outside 31 NFL teams, whichever, fraction of those teams would be in the sweepstakes for Sanders, they see what's going on. They're paying close attention, and that phone's going to start ringing if it hasn't already. So Emmanuel Sanders, I think he's probably at the top of the list in terms of likelihood. Let's talk about Chris Harris Jr. Now, the Broncos, he held out this past offseason. The Broncos did something that is quite unprecedented on the NFL landscape, and they gave him a raise for a contract year. Usually if a player holds out and he comes back because the team met his demands, it's because they gave him an extension. They gave him a raise in the short term, but also gave him an extension, added additional years, because that's what's in it for the team. The team, what they get in return for caving to that player's demands is they get that, and you assume it's a blue chip caliber player who is holding out, they get that player for an additional year or 2 or 3 years or whatever the term of that extension might be. In Chris Harris's case, that didn't happen. They added $3.5 million to his 2019 salary. He returned, and he's still in a contract year. He hasn't been making the same type of negative comments toward his coaches or towards the franchise in general, but you can tell he's unhappy. And you and I have both been telling our listeners for 6 months now that this is probably Chris Harris Jr.'s last year in the orange and blue. But where this team's at depth-wise at the cornerback position, do you see the Broncos, even knowing at this point that they've probably faced some facts, they've probably come to terms with the reality that they're not competing this year, they still have to field a semi-respectable product on the field. Do you get rid of Chris Harris Jr. if the price is right?
Emphasis on semi. I don't think you can, though. Losing Bosby and not having Bryce Callahan back there, I think that's the whole reason why they even signed Callahan, was to take over that slot role and be the younger or, more upside Chris Harris Jr. at a potentially cheaper rate. I don't see that happening. I think even if he was playing at a higher level, you mentioned Chad the depth and you mentioned Elway, I don't think he's going to want to just unload all these moving parts because it would be an indictment on him, and he doesn't want to admit that word, and that's what it would be, is rebuild. So if there's one player, I think it'll be Emmanuel Sanders. Chris Harris Jr. is a very distant second to me. Maybe if they got a second-round offer for him, I don't see that happening. Knowing he's going to be unsigned next year, I think teams will maybe wait and see if they can get him on the open market. I don't see him being traded, though.
There have been rumors that the Philadelphia Eagles could be in on the Chris Harris Jr. sweepstakes. And, I mean, that's just one of those situations, flippant Booch, of John Elway saying, show me the money. What are you willing to pony up to get a blue chip corner? Now, in Chris Harris Jr.'s mind, Zach, he sees himself as the best cornerback in the NFL. 2019, the first 7 games of this season would beg to differ. However, he still is an upper echelon. I would say, even at worst, he's a top 15 cornerback, and he's just really, Fangio's defense speaks for itself, and it stands on its own merit in terms of his resume. But it takes time to sink in, and it takes time to get the right personnel in place. Look at what happened in Chicago. That Bears defense didn't become a number 1 caliber team or defense until 2019, 4 years after Fangio arrived, and it took all the right personnel pieces on that chessboard moving into place. And so for the Broncos, it's probably going to take some time. Chris Harris Jr., this late in his career, he doesn't have the time. He doesn't want the time, but he still thinks he's the best in the league, Zach. If the Philadelphia Eagles are of a mind to agree and they're willing to pony up a 3rd-round pick, I could see the Broncos dishing it. Anything less than that, a 4th, a 5th, a 6th, no, it's not going to happen. I think the Broncos would rather hedge their bet, just take whatever comp pick they can get down the road, and know that they at least have one highly competent corner on the field for these remaining games.
Yeah, the Eagles are interesting because I'm looking up right now and I see them getting scored on in tonight's game. So they can use some defensive help. They fancy themselves being a contender, and they have a very aggressive GM in Howie Roseman. Yeah, if the Broncos are going to unload these players, they're going to go to a contender. I see Emmanuel Sanders, maybe with the Saints or the Ravens, the contending team. Philadelphia makes sense for Chris Harris Jr., but that whole best cornerback in the NFL argument, that was dead the moment Tyreek Hill just torched him on Thursday night. I mean, that just proved he's nowhere near that level.
And that's what's, the crappy, the life of a cornerback in the NFL is you can go into a game and play 60 snaps, and 59 of them you can shut down your opponent. But if one of those snaps, a guy leaks out, or you just get beaten one-on-one like Harris did against Tyreek Hill, that's what people remember, and that's what unfortunately kind of follows you from a reputation perspective. Because if you go back to that Chiefs game, Harris was playing good. They did limit Tyreek Hill. one splash play, and of course it came at the expense of Chris Harris Jr., completely reshapes the narrative. Now, Robert here is asking, could the Broncos get a 7th-round pick for Joe Flacco? No. Maybe a breakfast burrito.
A bag of footballs, maybe.
Maybe.
It's not going to happen.
If he wasn't on the books for the amount of money that he is, maybe you could, if a team was really desperate from a quarterback perspective. But he's been terrible this year, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, even then, if a quarterback desperate team, I would rather lure Mark Sanchez out of retirement than trade a draft pick for Flacco, who literally can't move. I mean, the guy is physically unable to move around. So now they won't get a 7th-round pick. They are stuck with him in every sense for the rest of the season.
We don't necessarily need to pile on Joe Flacco at this point. Sinji, though, says, yo, Chad, Zach, what's good? I'm officially off the make an excuse for Flacco train. I know the O-line had a horrible day, but some of those sacks could have been avoided. Yes, most of those, I would say half of those sacks would have been avoided if you have a top 15 quarterback or even a marginally mobile and a marginally hungry quarterback back there. Joe Flacco, though, is none of those things, and so you saw 8 sacks pile up. Kathleen says, do you guys think Von Miller is angry and frustrated with the entire Broncos franchise? We know he is frustrated with the offense and defense. Yeah, I think Von Miller's – yeah, of course. I mean, the last 4 years, Zach, he's been in the tail end of his prime, and it's been a complete waste. The Broncos have not made the playoffs since 2015, the year they won the Super Bowl. They're fixing to make it 4 years in a row. Of course, a future Hall of Fame caliber player is not happy with that. And you can be like you can be the most, you can have a character and a football reputation of the likes of DeMarcus Ware, impeccable reputation. He's going to be unhappy, and Von Miller, no different.
Yeah, he carried this team the last couple seasons, and he wasted his prime, like you said, and he heard the little ribbing from Fangio all offseason, and I think that ticked him off enough. But then the Broncos coming out and going through that losing streak and him realizing that what most fans realize is that they're a ways away from contending. I don't necessarily blame Von. I mean, I would like to see him perform better on the field, maybe look a little less apathetic. But I don't blame the guy. He's been put up with crap after crap since the Super Bowl, and he's been the only shining star on this team, and it just wears you down after a while. The DeMarcus Ware point's great because it doesn't matter how high character you are, what you've been through, what you've accomplished. You're still a person, and having that chip away at you for year in and year out, it just gets old after a while.
Appreciate the donation. Drop your pocket. He says, keep up the good work. I think Miller needs to be traded. A hot take, but I don't think he's elite, and this team takes on a lot of his personality, which isn't much fire there. And, a year ago, that was a atypical take from a Broncos fan. It's increasingly building up steam. I'm not saying it's anywhere close to being a majority take in the fan base, Zach, but I'm seeing a lot more comments on social media from fans that are fed up kind of with Von. I mean, what is he? He's 7 games in, 2.5 sacks. Obviously, the fit in Fangio's scheme has not been there. And I don't know if it's because Von hasn't bought in, if he hasn't embraced it, or if it's simply a matter of Fangio is not putting Von in the best position to succeed. But Zach, there's no getting around the fact that it's been really slow going. John Elway talked about great players need to play great, which is why he has no problem with when Vic Fangio says something critical of Von Miller publicly. And I've maintained that the addition to that sentence is great players need to play great in big moments. And Von just hasn't really come through this year in any of the key, crucial, big moments this team has found themselves in.
Yeah, even when he had Bradley Chubb, even when this Broncos defense was close to full strength, it wasn't the same Von. And we said at the last podcast where now if Von gets a sack or gets near the quarterback, it's weird to see. It's surprising to see. He's just not himself this year, and I think the trickle-down effect from the losing and Vic Fangio's the personality difference there just took a toll on him. So we'll have to see what happens and how that plays out.
Jordan Johnson coming in off the top rope with a donation on Super Chat.
Appreciate you, Jordan. Thank you.
Also sporting a very handsome hat, if I don't say so myself. Appreciate you, brother. Let's see here. What else we got on people's minds? Here's Buana Beast. Let's see what he says here. Connor McGovern can earn a contract. I still miss Matt Paradis. He's doing great things for the Panthers and Christian McCaffrey. Did the Broncos err in their decision to allow Paradis to walk? They were worried about that ankle. And Connor McGovern, he hasn't been terrible, but he hasn't really been tearing it up as a center. I think he's more a natural fit at guard.
Yep.
Did they err in allowing Paradis to hit the bricks?
You and I both disagree with the move. We talked about it at the Combine, Chad, when they were overselling the ankle injury, and it was mostly a clean break. And he went on to have a pretty good recovery with Carolina, and he's been looking good, as the question said. I wanted Paradis to come back, but Elway made his decision, and he decided to save some money, and it was Elway thinking he knows best, and I don't think it paid off for him this year.
The irony is that Paradis had been an Iron Man. That's what he had built his reputation in the NFL. Yeah, I've never made it to a Pro Bowl, but I'm a guy who plays 100% of my team's snaps on a year in, year out basis. Finally, the straw breaks the camel's back, and, he ends up on IR last year, which was such a shame because, he was in a contract year and he was fixing to make some bank. He still ended up getting paid from the Panthers, but I think, Zach, that was a drop in the bucket compared to what he was in store to make had he not gotten injured halfway through the year. But yeah, I think right now the Broncos are probably ruining their decision to let Paradis walk. And it's not necessarily because McGovern has been terrible, but rather Matt Paradis is a blue chip center. He's one of the top 5 best centers in the NFL, and Connor McGovern is not. Now, Kathleen here says, what do you guys think about firing Rich Scangarello and having Mike Munchak become the offensive coordinator? We had a report on milehighhuddle.com after the game that with how bad that offensive performance was, and frankly, the fact that they've converted 6 third downs over their last 38 attempts, Zach, that Scangarello is finding himself on the hot seat a little bit. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, his head's underneath the guillotine or anything, or that he's imminent to be fired, but rather the onus and the pressure is on him. And we've seen in years past, Zach, John Elway lose patience with offensive coordinators halfway through the season. See Mike McCoy in 2017. Bill Musgrave only got a year and a little bit of change as an offensive coordinator before they turned the page on him. And so what's your answer, though, as if the Broncos ultimately chose to make a change? Would Mike Munchak make sense? Because to my knowledge, I can't think of a recent stop in which he was an offensive play caller, but I could be wrong on that.
It doesn't move the needle for me. I think giving up on Scangarello is kind of premature. This is a rookie coordinator he has a quarterback who's doing him no favors. And we talked about it on the last pod chat. Drew Lock is more of the Scangarello quarterback. So when he gets on the field, I think you'll see a better offense, at least a more explosive offense from under center. You got to give Scangarello at least 1 year, just like Fangio. I mean, they're rookie coaches. He hasn't been great. He seemed in over his head, but I don't think he's going to be fired. And to me, Mike Munchak, I saw his head coaching stint with the Titans. I don't like him as a coordinator. I think he's a good line coach, even though he can't really work wonders with Garrett Bowles, it seems. I would not promote him. I don't know who they promote, honestly, if they got rid of Scangarello, but he's not really going anywhere as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, there's the Broncos that at this stage are in a rock and a hard place. If he really is a flameout and the team realizes there's nothing there with Scangarello, which I myself am not ready to say that, but if the team comes to that conclusion, that's not a change they can make till next year anyway. TC McCartney is just barely getting just barely getting started as a position coach in the NFL, getting his feet wet. So Tim says here, it's time to trade anyone on an expiring contract that has any value, Sanders, Harris, Derek Wolfe, etc. I don't disagree with that premise. I really don't. Zach, I think, Derek Wolfe's going to have limited value out there because of his injury history and his relative performance this year, although he has had a couple of decent games that he has stacked in recent weeks. Adam Gotsis is a player I'd throw out there, especially in I don't know what you could get for him, but he is a former second-round pick. And if there's a team out there that needs a run-stuffing 5-tech defensive end, maybe you can get a 6th or 7th rounder in exchange for him, because it sounds like the way things are moving, he's a guy they're going to let go in free agency anyway.
I'm sure Elway will field calls on all these players, and I'm sure he'll make a call or two, but you need another person to tango with you. It's hard to just find a trade partner for either an underperforming player or an expensive player. Ultimately, one, maybe two at the most will be dealt. I think it'll be Emmanuel Sanders, and I think the rest will just be chalked up to a rumor this time of the year.
Muhammad wants to know, do you see Elway still not activating Drew Lock even though Flacco is playing like crap? Well, let's on a prediction scale, I predict the Broncos do bite the bullet and activate Drew Lock. But, Zach, it would not surprise me or stun me if they didn't, because Elway doesn't necessarily want any more egg on his face as it relates to Mr. Joe Flacco. Because if he comes in, Drew Lock, and does even marginally well as a starter in place of Flacco, it makes what is already considered a laughable trade that the Broncos not only traded for Flacco, but then gave him I guess technically it's not a raise, but they gave him 2 additional years when they restructured his contract on the doorstep of the season. Drew Lock comes in, and it makes both of those moves even more laughable.
Let me say this. If Drew Lock is healthy and they don't activate him, Elway should be fired on the spot. There's literally no reason not to activate the guy you just invested a second-round pick and you traded up for, especially with your understood franchise quarterback Joe Flacco playing like Joe Flacco. He will be activated. I think it's only a matter of when he sees the field. I can't predict the exact week, but going into the Broncos bye, week 10, that's the perfect time to make a switch. They have 2 hard games coming up. They have to know by now the season's going nowhere. It's full evaluation mode. He will be activated. He better be activated, or else Elway, he would go all in on Flacco in that circumstance. He would show that he's fully committed no matter what, and then Flacco's going to bomb and he'll look worse. So Locke is his golden ticket right now. He has to activate the guy, and if he doesn't, I have no words for that.
And I hope that's his mindset, frankly. I really do. I hope that's the way Elway is viewing it through that rubric that you just described there, Zach. Jamal says, do you think Elway regrets not hiring Kyle Shanahan? Let's take a look at...
How do you not?
Well, just by the way the Niners are doing this year and how they've done every time they've had a healthy quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo, you would think, yeah, he probably regrets that. But then, Zach, look at he hires Vic Fangio. Then a first-time head coach who's also choosing to be a play caller on game day as a defensive coordinator, basically, now made head coach. You would think that the Broncos would go with their first impulse possibly, which was to vault Gary Kubiak into the offensive coordinator position, because you want to temper that inexperienced Fangio brings to the table with a well-versed, a guy who's been calling plays in the NFL as an offensive guy for a long time, just so that that's not something this new beleaguered head coach has to worry about on a game-in, game-out basis. But that's not the path Elway went. He went to the source. He went to Kyle Shanahan because that's the model ultimately he's trying to emulate. Rich Scangarello, the quarterback's coach, that hasn't worked out. But yeah, Zach, I think you could bet your bottom dollar that Elway probably regrets not hiring Shanahan, Kyle, that is, when he had the chance.
I still can't get over the fact that Broncos could have had Kyle Shanahan and Wade Phillips on the same staff, and they passed up on retaining Phillips and hiring Shanahan to hire Vance Joseph. That is one of Elway's, take away the quarterback, situations and his personnel moves. That is by far his biggest gaffe as Broncos GM. Because look what Shanahan's doing with half the talent the Broncos had in the last couple of years. He has the only undefeated team in the NFC right now. It all comes down to coaching, and he really has proven to be a really good head coach from that same McVay cloth. He's the only guy other than McVay who's really proving his worth.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
You guys, the holidays are approaching, and you may be thinking about how you're going to save some extra coins, some extra dollars. Well, we've got a way that maybe you haven't thought of. You can consolidate your high-interest credit card balances to a lower rate and save with Lightstream. You can get a rate as low as 5.95% APR with autopay, which is much lower than the national average interest rate of over 20% APR. There are no fees, and you can even get your money as soon as the day that you apply. Just for our listeners, apply now and get a special interest rate discount. The only way to get this discount is to go to lightstream.com/huddleup. lightstream.com/huddleup. Subject to credit approval. Rate includes 0.50% autopay discount. Terms and conditions apply. And offers are subject to change without notice. Visit lightstream.com/huddleup for more information. Today's episode is brought to you by CBS Sports HQ, the brand new streaming sports news network. It's live 24/7 and costs you nothing. That's right. It's sports coverage that's always on, and it's always free. Always. CBS Sports HQ, whether you're a fantasy player or just want to follow the latest updates on your team in the NFL, allows you to do that in real time, and it's free. Their coverage is always focused on the game at CBS Sports HQ. Tons of highlights, breaking news as it happens, fantasy advice, and something we care deeply about here, gambling picks and analysis to get that extra edge. I know when I turn on CBS Sports HQ, I'll see the tips, I'll see the trends I need to win my bets. And don't forget, you can get access to all this great coverage completely free. I don't mean free for a week or a month, or if you have some special cable package, it's totally, completely free for everybody. You don't even need a login. Just download the CBS Sports app on your phone, Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV, or other connected devices at any time to watch CBS Sports HQ. No fake debates, just sports for real sports fans at the great price of completely free. You don't even have to log in or sign up for anything. You guys, download the CBS Sports app and watch CBS Sports HQ today. Basketball, football, baseball, hockey, and more. October is the only month of the year that all 4 major sports are going on at the same time. So what better time to get into the game than now? Head over to mybookie.ag. You go to mybookie.ag, you can find out what the odds are, what the spread is for the Broncos-Colts game coming up in Week 8, and that just scratches the surface. We have teamed up with MyBookie this October to give you this great offer. Sign up at mybookie.ag and use promo code OVERTIME, and they will match your first deposit. Again, promo code OVERTIME, and new users get their first deposit doubled. mybookie.ag, you play, you win, you get paid. Yep, and he wanted that job, despite the fact that it would have been working in the shadow of his father, who built a two-time Super Bowl champion head coach, Mike Shanahan. Kyle wanted that job, went out on a limb publicly in his declaration that he would love the job, interviewed for the job. Elway went with the leader of men. So anyway, let's go here with Big Daddy Kane. He says, what if there's a reason, Zach, Vic Fangio has never been a head coach?
Fair question. We wondered it too, Chad. I mean, we wondered why it took so long for him to get a head coaching job, why he seemed to be passed over for, seemed like, 4 decades now. You can make the case that he was never cut out to be a head coach. Some guys, like Norv Turner, Marty Schottenheimer, they're just better being coordinators and not head coaches. And that might be, it's still a little too premature, I'd say, but that might be the case with Fangio.
It's one of those things where I think it's too early to say definitively anything on Fangio. But you can see in the way he conducts press conferences, and he's not a dynamic personality. Now, that doesn't always mean, look at Bill Belichick. He's not a dynamic personality. You don't need to be a dynamic, speaker, communicator in order to be a really good and dominant coach. But it does make you wonder, at times when he has asked the hard questions from assembled media on a week-in, week-out basis, he oftentimes either just straight up chooses not to answer them directly or doesn't seem to have a grasp on what the real answer is. And that's what concerns me most, Zach, is does he recognize what's really going on? I think he does. And I think he's in kind of a unique situation where the politics of his job that he walked into, considering the previous 3 years this team has been through, is simply makes it a lot more complex, his situation.
We talked about that at the Combine, watching Fangio do some media rounds. He looked really uncomfortable and was almost getting on-the-spot coaching. So this job is definitely new to him. But the thing about acting like Bill Belichick, there's been so many Belichick knockoffs, Josh McDaniels, Eric Mangini, who try to be Belichick but don't have the rep to back it up. And I think part of the reason why Vaughn, for one, is so upset is because Fangio came in and tried to be this, I don't want to say dictator, but disciplinarian, and he didn't have really the resume of a head coach to back that up. So that could be some of the disconnect there.
And on top of that with Vaughn, and then we'll put that topic to bed, and we're running a little bit long here anyway, is I just don't think Vaughn, I think he wanted to buy into this system, but once it got out into the actual application of the system on game day against teams, he realized that it's so different than what he's been asked to do in years past. It's just been hard for him to get up to speed. And now the proof being in the pudding, they're sitting here at 2-5. I think it's going to take a near miracle to swing Von Miller back into the Fangio camp. Now, publicly, I think he'll continue to come out and at least not say anything negative about Fangio, but privately, I think he's at a loss here. TJ wants to know, sorry if I'm late, but what if we trade Garrett Bowles and a pick for Trent Williams? Now, of course, that's the Washington Redskins left tackle who is held out. Zach, I'm not opposed to – seriously, we talked about this on the Gut Reaction last week on Thursday night. I'm not opposed to trading a premium round pick for Trent Williams because I think it takes care of Drew Lock in the future. It might not lead to any competing this year, but it at least protects your investment in Drew Lock down the road. But Garrett Bowles as a part of that equation, Zach, who else in the NFL wants Garrett Bowles at this stage? He's the most penalized player, not just offensive lineman, player in the NFL since he entered the league.
I don't think the Broncos want Garrett Bowles at this point. And like I said on Twitter, if he was a third, fourth round pick, he'd be out of a job right now, let alone in the starting lineup. I have to disagree with you, though, Chad, on Trent Williams. I just think giving up assets for a disgruntled, injury-prone player with a big contract is the last thing the Broncos need to do in a rebuilding year. They handed out big money to Juwan James. They used a first-round pick on Garrett Bowles. I think just buy the time with the guys you have and then go into next offseason, maybe prioritize tackle high up in the draft.
Before we get to Stewart here, by the way, Fangio on Friday after the game revealed that Juwan James has been fully cleared to play for what it's worth. And he was fully cleared to play in time for that Thursday night game. But he felt uncomfortable, according to Coach Fangio, because he hadn't had enough time after missing 6 weeks, basically on task in practice. And so Fangio basically backed the player and said, yeah, let's get you a few days of practice before we roll you back out there. Before we jump to Stewart here, do you think that was the right decision, seeing how badly, of course, Bowles was bad, but Elijah Wilkinson was equally as bad in terms of giving up sacks?
Yeah, I think they felt they could have got by the KC defense without Juwan James, giving him that extra week of rest. But in hindsight, always, of course, it didn't work out that way. Wilkinson is a good backup to have, kind of like Billy Turner. He's just not really starting material in Denver. So the fact that he can get back as soon as possible, it'll help the entire offense. And when Lockett's on the field, at least we'll have that right side, he can feel fairly confident about, maybe not the left side, though.
All right, guys, we got time for one more here. We're going to grab from Stewart. He says, do you think we will have a chance to see Locke play after the bye?
Yeah.
Now, the bye for the Broncos, in case you don't know, this year, it comes in week 10. So between now and then, the Broncos have the Indianapolis Colts next week, week 8. They go on the road, play Indy. Then they're home again for the Cleveland Browns. Then it's the bye. Now, in between that time, the Broncos not activate, but they can get him out on the practice field, Drew Lock. Per NFL rules, he has to practice for 2 full weeks before the team can activate him back to the roster. So even though he was eligible to practice this past week ahead of week 7, because it was a short week, the Broncos didn't practice. And so he did not practice. So that doesn't count. That's a lost week for him toward the formula. So that means instead of coming back week 9, he has to come back after the bye regardless, week 11. So the soonest you can see Drew Lock is week 11, Stewart. And I don't think we're going to see him that soon. Even if they activate him, Zach, unless Joe Flacco in these next 2 games is throwing 3 and 4 picks a game, I think the Broncos are going to wait till they get that 8th loss. Then they'll put in the young guy.
It could be. I just think if the Colts are no joke, that's a really good team they're about to play. And I can definitely see a loss and maybe even a big loss. And the Browns, that's a volatile team. If their offense explodes, they have a good defense too. I feel like, though, if the Broncos lose these next 2 games, Flacco's not going to put up suddenly great numbers. Making that change of the bye week is the perfect time for Denver. I would not be surprised at all. Might be a little premature to say, a little early, but week 11 coming out of the bye could be Drew Lock time. I think the more audition time, obviously, for him, the better. And it all depends on Flacco. If they can beat one of the next 2 teams, I think, like you said, Chad, they'll wait. But they lose 2 more games in a row going into that bye. How do you keep Flacco on the field?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I said 8 games, but if they end up going into the bye on the heels of a 3-game losing streak,
got to do it.
It probably means Flacco's play continued to be poor as it has been the last 3 games. How do you not cave in to what will be not only fan outcry, but the media will just be screaming. Denver radio, Denver television, the national media will be screaming. So circle that week 11, and that doesn't mean that you hope that the Broncos lose these next 2 games, but at this stage, the playoffs are off the table. So what do you really have to root for in terms of victories? You want to get the next guy. You want to get the guy out there who actually has the potential to be the solution, not the problem Flacco's revealed himself to be.
Yeah, and I hate to root for tanking, but if you want what's in the best interest of the Broncos, you better hope they lose the next 2 games and you see Drew Lock on the field as much as possible. They have to know what they have in the guy, and just dragging this Flacco experiment out now is just a waste of time. And switching to Lock would at least buy Elway through the rest of the season. It would take some pressure off of him, and I think giving the fans what they want would help his situation out, his hot seat, a little bit.
All right, guys. Well, we'll see what happens ultimately with Drew Lock. We'll find out what happens on the trade market. The deadline is October 29th, and the momentum appears to be building towards Emmanuel Sanders exiting stage left from this Denver Broncos franchise. I think the New England Patriots are a team you got to look for in those sweepstakes. The San Francisco 49ers, another team. We'll see what happens there, but that's got to do it for today's episode, live simulcast episode of the Huddle Up Podcast on YouTube and Facebook. Thanks to all of our great viewers who have made this a compelling conversation here. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us, getting in the questions, getting in your reactions, exercising the demons. We are your football priests, Zach and I, and each and every week we love being here for you guys to get the absolution, the answers to your burning Broncos questions, help you exercise those demons. So in the meantime, though, you guys, we'll be back on Tuesday with a fresh episode for you. So stay tuned for that. Follow Zach on Twitter at Kelberman NFL. He's got hot takes coming left and right. No, he's dropping knowledge all the time. His articles covering the NFL. You don't want to miss that. He is Heavy.com's lead NFL writer. Myself at Chad and Jensen. And then follow the podcast on Twitter as well at Huddle Up Pod. Thanks again, everybody. We'll be back in a day's time. For Zach Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We will talk to you guys then.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.